The train's whistle screamed across the frozen valley, like a warning from heaven itself. But 8-year-old Emma Martinez had already made her choice. With bloody fingers and a heart pounding against her ribs, she yanked at the ropes binding the police officer to the railroad tracks, knowing they had maybe 30 seconds before 200 tons of steel would solve this problem permanently. Her twin sister Ella worked beside her in desperate silence, while their German shepherd Max circled them both, the retired canine's training telling him this was wrong, all wrong, but his love for these children overriding every instinct except the need to protect them. None of them knew that this moment of terror would unravel the darkest secret their small town had ever buried, or that their courage would save 13 missing children who had been given up for dead. Sometimes angels come with badges. Sometimes they come with braids and hand-me-down coats, and sometimes God sends the kind with 4 paws and hearts bigger than fear itself. The sun rose reluctantly over Coal Valley, as if it too had given up hope on this forgotten corner of America. December's first light crept across snow-covered hills like a whispered apology, casting long shadows from the skeletal remains of what had once been the heartbeat of a thriving community. Abandoned mining equipment stood sentinel against the pale sky, rusted conveyor belts frozen mid-motion, their metal frames twisted into grotesque sculptures by 5 years of neglect and weather's relentless assault. The morning air carried a bitter bite that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of abandonment, the chill of dreams left to die, and the bitter wind that howled through defunct mine shafts like the collective sigh of 1,000 broken promises. Each gust seemed to whisper the names of families who had packed their hopes into battered pickup trucks and disappeared down the winding mountain road, leaving behind only empty houses with broken windows that stared blindly across the valley like the hollow eyes of the departed. Once this place had pulsed with life. Once the whistle that called men to work at dawn had been answered by the steady rhythm of boots on gravel, lunch pails clanking, and the warm yellow glow of kitchen windows where wives prepared coffee strong enough to fuel another day in the depths of the earth. The coal mines had been more than just a source of income. They had been the very soul of Coal Valley, the reason for its existence, the promise that hard work and honest sweat could build something lasting. But promises like coal seams eventually run dry. 5 years ago, the last mine had shuttered its gates with the finality of a coffin lid closing. The corporate executives had delivered the news through lawyers and accountants, men in expensive suits who had never felt coal dust under their fingernails or tasted the metallic fear of a tunnel collapse. Market conditions, they called it. Economic realities. As if poverty were just another weather pattern that would eventually pass. Now fewer than 200 souls remained scattered across the valley, like the last leaves clinging to bare branches. The elderly, too set in their ways to start over somewhere else. The sick, too weak to make the journey. And those too poor to leave. Families like the Martinez's, who had sunk roots so deep that pulling them up would mean bleeding out everything they had left. The railroad tracks cut through the center of it all like surgical scars, twin lines of rusted steel that had once carried the valley's black gold to markets across the nation. Now they served only as a highway for freight trains that thundered through without stopping, their cars loaded with coal from more profitable mines in distant counties. The engineers never slowed, never looked, never acknowledged the ghost town they passed through. To them, Coal Valley was just another mile marker on their route to somewhere more important. The sound of those passing trains had become the valley's heartbeat, a rhythm of loss that reminded everyone left behind that the world was moving forward without them. The rumble would start as a whisper in the distance, build to a roar that rattled windows and shook foundations, then fade to nothing, leaving behind only the echo of what used to be. Between the abandoned structures, snow drifted against rusted machinery, like nature's attempt to provide a burial shroud for the valley's industrial corpse. A broken-down coal loader sat frozen in time, its massive arm reaching toward heaven, as if pleading for mercy that would never come. Grain silos that had once stored tons of coal now stood empty and hollow, their metal sides creaking in the wind like the bones of sleeping giants. This was the world that greeted each dawn in Coal Valley, a landscape of broken dreams and rusted hopes, where the only constant was the weight of what had been lost. The morning light revealed every crack in every foundation, every boarded window, every for sale sign that had faded to illegibility without ever attracting a buyer. Yet somehow, impossibly, life persisted in this desolation. Smoke still rose from a handful of chimneys. Lights still flickered in scattered windows. Children still played in yards where swing sets stood like monuments to a time when the future had seemed certain. Because even in the depths of abandonment, even when hope felt as cold and distant as the winter sun, the human spirit found ways to endure. Over. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of another bitter day. But it also carried something else, the faint sound of a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the crunch of small boots on frozen gravel, the whisper of voices that refused to be silenced by the cold. Dawn had broken over the forgotten valley, and somewhere in that desolation, a family was beginning another day of survival, another chapter in their quiet war against despair. Inside the small railroad house that sat like a stubborn dandelion in a field of abandoned dreams, Rosa Martinez fought her own private battle against time and sickness. At 34, she should have been in the prime of her life, but cancer had aged her beyond her years, stealing the lustrous black hair that had once fallen like silk to her shoulders, and replacing it with thin, brittle strands that spoke of chemotherapy's cruel arithmetic. She sat by the frost-covered window in a chair that had been her husband's favorite before the mine accident took him 2 years ago, before the medical bills started arriving like death threats, before cancer decided to make the Martinez family its latest victim. The morning light was pale and unforgiving, revealing the hollow valleys that had appeared beneath her cheekbones, the way her wedding ring now slipped loose on fingers grown thin from treatments that promised hope but delivered only more pain. Rosa's cough was her constant companion now, a harsh bark that erupted without warning and left her handkerchief dotted with crimson evidence of her body's rebellion. She tried to muffle the sound, pressing the stained cloth to her lips and willing her lungs to cooperate. But the cancer didn't care about her desire for dignity. It took what it wanted and left her gasping in its wake. But even with death stalking her through her own bloodstream, Rosa's hands remained busy. Love, she had discovered, was an action verb, and as long as she could move her fingers, she would keep demonstrating that love in the only way she had left. On her lap lay scraps of fabric she had salvaged from the thrift store's discard pile. Pieces of old dresses, worn sheets, and outgrown children's clothes that she was transforming into winter garments for her daughters. Her sewing scissors caught the lamplight as she worked by the yellow glow of a single bulb. Electricity rationed like everything else in their household. Each snip was calculated, each piece of fabric precious as gold. She was making Emma a new coat from what had once been a blue Sunday dress, the material soft and warm despite its previous life. For Ella, she was crafting mittens from the sleeves of her own favorite sweater, the one she'd worn on her first date with Miguel. The tumors, but seemed to be shrinking her entire world instead. Sometimes the needle would slip, pricking her finger and leaving tiny drops of blood on the fabric. But Rosa had learned to work around her body's betrayals. A mother's love, she knew, was stronger than cancer, more persistent than pain, more determined than death itself. From across the small room came the soft sounds of her daughters preparing for another day of survival disguised as adventure. Emma and Ella moved through their morning routine with the quiet efficiency of children who had learned too young that noise attracted worry, and their mother already carried enough worry to sink a ship. Emma, the gentler of the twins by exactly 7 minutes, and a lifetime of temperament, stood behind her sister, working magic with a hairbrush and practiced fingers. Her touch was tender as she sectioned Ella's dark hair into neat braids, weaving them tight enough to last through a day of crawling through industrial ruins, but loose enough not to pull. Emma had appointed herself the family's caretaker of small details, the one who remembered to check that coat pockets were empty before washing, who counted out pills into Rosa's weekly organizer, who made sure Ella's shoes were tied properly before they ventured out into the cold. Ella, meanwhile, sorted through yesterday's findings with the focused intensity of a professional appraiser. Pieces of copper wire, aluminum cans, small metal brackets, and mysterious mechanical parts were arranged in careful piles on the worn linoleum floor. She had an eye for valuable scrap that amazed even the dealers at the recycling center, an intuitive understanding of which metals commanded the highest prices, which items were worth the effort of carrying home. "This piece here," Ella whispered, holding up a bent piece of brass. "Mrs. Henderson said brass is worth almost as much as copper now. And look at this aluminum piece, no rust, still shiny. That's good money." Emma nodded seriously, as if her sister were delivering a lecture on quantum physics rather than the economics of scrap metal. In their world, such knowledge was just as vital, just as worthy of respect and attention. Watching over them all, never moving from his chosen position near Rosa's chair, lay Max. The retired German Shepherd K9 was 7 years old, but carried himself with the dignity of a soldier who had seen combat and lived to tell about it. His left ear bore the evidence of his service, a ragged tear from the bullet that had grazed his skull during a meth lab raid gone wrong, the injury that had ended his law enforcement career but not his instinct to serve and protect. Max's brown eyes missed nothing. He tracked every movement Emma and Ella made, catalogued every sound from beyond their thin walls, monitored Rosa's breathing for changes that might signal distress. His massive head rested on paws that had once tracked criminals through dark alleys, but now his most important job was providing comfort to a dying woman and security for 2 little girls who had already seen too much loss. There was an unspoken understanding in the Martinez household, a communication that flowed beneath the surface of their morning routine like an underground river. They all knew Rosa was dying. They all knew their time together was measured in months, not years. They all knew that their small family was balanced on the edge of a precipice, one crisis away from complete collapse. But they also knew something else, something that cancer couldn't touch, that poverty couldn't steal, that even death couldn't diminish. They knew they belonged to each other, that their love was the one constant in a world that had taken everything else. And as long as they had that, as long as they could wake up together and face another day as a team, they were richer than all the coal that had ever been pulled from the valley's depths. Rosa's cough subsided, and she looked up from her sewing to smile at her daughters. It was a fragile smile, brittle as old paper, but it contained all the fierce protectiveness of a mother's heart. The ritual began the same way it had every morning for the past 3 years, with Emma reaching for the canvas bag that hung on a nail beside the door, its fabric worn soft from countless expeditions into Coal Valley's industrial graveyard. The bag was a relic from Miguel's mining days, tough enough to carry his work tools and large enough now to hold the treasures his daughters discovered in their daily hunts for survival. Ella was already pulling on her coat, a patchwork creation that Rosa had sewn from 3 different jackets, each piece contributing its own story to the whole. The sleeves were too long, folded up to accommodate 8-year-old arms, but the coat was warm and waterproof, 2 qualities that mattered more than fashion in their world. Emma's coat was newer, a thrift store find that Rosa had altered to fit, its red wool still bright enough to stand out against the winter landscape. "Crowbar?" Ella asked, running through their mental checklist. "Check," Emma replied, tucking the small tool into the bag's outside pocket. "Work gloves?" "Both pairs," Emma confirmed, though the gloves were sized for adult hands and made the twins look like children playing dress-up in their father's clothes. "Thermos?" Emma held up the dented metal container that held weak coffee sweetened with precious sugar. The hot liquid would keep their fingers nimble when the December cold tried to stiffen their joints, make the metal tools bearable to handle, even when frost made everything else feel like ice. Max watched this preparation ritual with the focused attention of a professional getting ready for duty. The moment he saw Emma reach for that canvas bag, something fundamental shifted in the old German shepherd's posture. His ears snapped to attention, his slight limp, a souvenir from the same drug bust that had scarred his ear. Adrenaline and purpose flooded his system. This was the transformation that never failed to amaze Rosa. The way her family's protector could shed years and injuries when called to service. Max's dark coat seemed to shine brighter, his brown eyes sharpened with the focus of a canine officer reporting for patrol. He stood and shook himself, every muscle remembering the training that had made him one of the county's most reliable drug detection dogs, before the bullet changed everything. "You girls be extra careful today," Rosa said from her chair by the window, her voice carrying the weight of a mother's permanent worry. "The weather service says there might be more snow and the tracks will be slippery." "We'll be careful, Mama," Emma promised, slinging the bag across her shoulder. "And remember to check the eastern section today," Rosa added, though she couldn't quite explain why. Something had been pulling at her thoughts all morning, a feeling she couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. "Sometimes the good metal ends up in places you don't expect," Ella nodded seriously. In their business, intuition was just another tool, as valuable as the crowbar or the keen eye for valuable scrap. If Mama had a feeling, it was worth following. Rosa rose slowly from her chair, fighting the wave of dizziness that always accompanied sudden movements. She walked to her daughters, her steps careful but determined, and placed a hand on each girl's shoulder. This moment, this blessing, was as essential to their daily ritual as the tools in their bag. "Stay together," she said, her voice taking on the cadence of a prayer she had repeated hundreds of times. "Listen to Max and remember, you're stronger than this place thinks you are." The words were more than encouragement. They were armor against a world that had already taken too much from the Martinez family. Rosa spoke them like an incantation, a spell of protection woven from maternal love and desperate hope. "We know, Mama," Ella said, rising on tiptoe to kiss her mother's cheek. "We'll bring back something good today," Emma added, her young voice carrying a confidence that made Rosa's heart ache with pride and terror in equal measure. The twins moved toward the door, their boots already laced, their spirits bright despite the gray morning that waited beyond their threshold. Max fell into step beside them, his body language shifting into the alert but relaxed stance of a professional bodyguard. He would stay between the girls and any potential danger, his senses tuned to frequencies human ears couldn't detect, his loyalty as absolute as gravity. But just as Emma's hand touched the door handle, Max did something unexpected. He paused, his large head turning back toward Rosa, with an expression that seemed almost human in its complexity. His dark eyes held worry, devotion, and something else, an inexplicable sense that today would be different from all the days that had come before. Rosa felt her breath catch in her throat. In all their years together, she had learned to read Max's moods and meanings like a book, written in a language only mothers and dogs understood. And what she saw in his eyes now made her heart skip with a premonition she couldn't name. "Max," she whispered. The dog held her gaze for another long moment, as if trying to communicate something beyond the reach of words. Then he turned and followed the girls out into the December morning, leaving Rosa standing in the doorway with her hand pressed to her chest and a prayer forming on her lips. The cold air rushed into the house as the door opened, carrying with it the scent of snow and the distant sound of wind through abandoned mine shafts. Emma and Ella stepped out onto their small porch, their breath immediately forming small clouds in the frigid air. Their boots crunched on frost-covered gravel as they began the walk that would take them to the railroad tracks. To another day of searching for treasures hidden among the ruins of their valley's industrial past. Behind them, Rosa stood silhouetted in the doorway, her thin frame wrapped in an old robe, watching as three small figures moved across the vast, empty landscape. The sight always made her think of David and Goliath, of Daniel in the lion's den, of all the biblical stories where faith and courage triumphed over impossible odds. Her daughters and their loyal companion looked so small against the backdrop of abandoned machinery and snow-covered hills, so vulnerable in the face of a world that had already shown them how cruel it could be. But they walked with purpose, with the unbreakable bond of a family that had learned to find strength in each other. Emma and Ella moved side by side, their steps synchronized by years of shared adventures. Max ranged slightly ahead, his professional instincts engaged, his senses already cataloging the sounds and smells that would guide their hunt. As they disappeared around the first bend in the path, Rosa closed the door and returned to her sewing. But her hands shook more than usual as she picked up her needle, and her eyes kept drifting to the window, as if she could still see them walking toward whatever destiny waited at the end of the railroad tracks. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, lonely as a ghost and twice as haunting. The familiar path to the railroad tracks was a journey through ghosts, not the supernatural kind, but the far more haunting presence of memories that clung to every landmark like morning frost. Emma and Ella had walked this route hundreds of times, but today something glittered in the snow that made Emma's heart impossible to miss, the color that had made their older sister laugh with joy when Rosa brought home a matching hat and mitten set from the church clothing drive 3 winters ago. "Look," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that whistled through the abandoned grain elevator. But she didn't need to point or explain. Ella had already seen it too, her dark eyes wide with the same recognition that was tearing Emma's heart into pieces. They stood frozen for a moment, 2 8-year-old girls confronted by a memory made manifest in knitted wool and winter snow. The mitten might belong to any child. Coal Valley still had a few families with young ones, though fewer each year as people packed up and chased hope toward distant cities. But logic meant nothing when your heart was breaking. In that instant, both twins were remembering Sophia's laughter, the way she would race ahead on this very path, her pink mittens flashing like beacons as she waved them back to catch up. Max felt the change in his charge's emotional temperature before they even fully processed it themselves. The German Shepherd's training had taught him to read human moods like a barometer reads pressure changes, and right now, both girls were radiating the kind of distress that made his protective instincts surge. He padded closer to Emma, pressing his warm bulk against her leg in the way he'd learned provided comfort during the long nights when nightmares about Sophia made sleep impossible. The silence stretched between the twins like a bridge neither wanted to cross. They had developed an unspoken agreement over the 3 years since Sophia vanished. They would protect each other from the crushing weight of that loss by never talking about it directly. Speaking Sophia's name aloud made the absence real in a way that silence couldn't, as long as they didn't voice their fears, their hopes, their desperate midnight wishes that she might still be alive somewhere. They could pretend they weren't slowly drowning in grief, but silence had its own weight, its own terrible gravity that pulled them deeper into pain with each passing day. As they continued their walk, Max's behavior began to shift in ways only the twins would notice. His gait changed as they passed the old oak tree where Sophia used to climb, her laughter ringing across the valley as she called down to her little sisters to watch her reach higher branches. The dog's ears flattened slightly, his head turning toward the tree with a longing that seemed almost human in its intensity. 300 yards further, where the tracks curved around a small hill, Max's pace slowed to an almost ceremonial deliberateness. This was where Sophia would always sprint ahead, her pink coat flying behind her like butterfly wings, racing to see what treasures might be waiting around the bend. She never walked when she could run, never whisked deep inside her soul. Sometimes I dream she's calling for us from the old mine. The words escaped Ella's lips like a prayer whispered in an empty church, so quiet that Emma almost convinced herself she'd imagined them. But Max's ears pricked forward, and Emma felt her own heart clench with recognition. Because she had those dreams too, dreams where Sophia's voice echoed from dark places, pleading for help that never came, calling their names until Emma woke with tears on her face and Ella's hand clutching hers across their shared bed. Emma's protective instincts kicked in with the force of a physical blow. She couldn't let Ella fall into that darkness, couldn't let her twin sister drown in the same grief that sometimes made Emma feel like she couldn't breathe. Moving with deliberate casualness, she pointed toward a glint of metal half hidden beneath a pile of coal slag. "Look, Ella, that might be copper wire. The good kind, with the thick insulation." Her voice was steady, practical, but her eyes drifted back to the pink mitten they'd left behind, now just a distant splash of color against the snow. Ella followed her sister's lead, with the grateful relief of someone thrown a lifeline. "You're right. And see that aluminum piece over there? No rust. That's worth at least 50 cents. They fell back into the familiar rhythm of scrap hunting, their voices taking on the business-like tone that had become their armor against the world. But even as they catalogued potential treasures and calculated possible profits, the absence walked with them like a fourth member of their small expedition. Sophia's ghost lived in every landmark, every memory, every moment when they expected to hear her voice, calling from ahead, and found only the wind answering back. Their family had been 5 once: Rosa, Miguel, Sophia, Emma, and Ella. A complete unit, a circle without breaks. Then the mine accident took Miguel, leaving a Rosa-shaped hole that everyone felt, but no one discussed. When Sofia disappeared 2 years later, the family didn't just lose another member. They lost their center of gravity, the bright spark that had kept them all believing in tomorrow. Now they were 3, orbiting around the empty spaces where their loved ones used to be, trying to hold their fractured family together through sheer force of will and love that refused to die, even when hope had packed its bags and left town. Emma picked up a piece of twisted metal that might once have been part of a mining cart, her small hands working to bend it into a more manageable shape. But her movements were automatic, her mind still focused on that pink mitten and all the memories it had stirred to life. Behind them, Max continued his vigilant patrol, but his body language spoke of more than professional duty. They're real than the ones that marked his torn ear. The morning sun climbed higher, but its light seemed unable to penetrate the shadow that Sofia's memory cast over their small procession. They walked on, 3 survivors bound together by loss, carrying their ghosts with them toward whatever the day might bring. Back in the small railroad house, Rosa waited until the sound of her daughter's footsteps had faded completely before she allowed herself to move. The morning ritual of sending them off, the blessing, the worry, the forced smile, had drained what little energy her body could spare. But there was something she needed to do, something she did every day, though Emma and Ella would never know about it. Her legs shook as she stood, the cancer and chemotherapy conspiring to make her feel decades older than her 34 years. Each step toward the back bedroom was an exercise in stubborn determination, her hand trailing along the wall for support. The floorboards creaked under her feet, a sound that had once annoyed her, but now provided reassurance that she was still here, still moving, still fighting. In the corner of what had once been her and Miguel's bedroom, beneath a loose board that looked identical to all the others, Rosa kept her most precious and most painful possessions. The hiding place had been Miguel's idea, back when they'd first moved into the house, and he'd wanted somewhere to stash a little emergency money. Now it held treasures far more valuable than cash. The remnants of a daughter who had vanished like smoke. Rosa's hands trembled as she pried up the board, revealing a wooden cigar box that Miguel had brought home from work years ago. The wood was scarred and faded, but inside lay Sofia's entire life, condensed into heartbreaking fragments. The drawings came first, crayon masterpieces that Sofia had created with the boundless creativity of a child who saw beauty everywhere. A stick-figure family standing in front of their house, everyone holding hands and smiling. A rainbow arcing over Coal Valley's hills, bright enough to make the real world look drab by comparison. A portrait of Max labeled "Best Dog Ever" in Sofia's careful kindergarten handwriting. Rosa's fingers traced the waxy lines, remembering how Sofia would present each artwork with ceremonial importance, demanding that it be hung on the refrigerator immediately. The house had been papered with Sofia's creations, a gallery of childhood joy that had made every room feel brighter. Beneath the drawings lay a small plastic bag containing a lock of Sofia's hair, silky black strands that Rosa had saved from Sofia's first real haircut. She opened the bag carefully, breathing in the faint scent that still clung to the hair after 3 years. It smelled like sunshine and bubble bath, like the shampoo Sofia had insisted on using because it meant frustration. Missing person report number 20199-0847. The words were typed in sterile bureaucratic language that couldn't capture the reality of a 10-year-old girl who loved pink mittens and told stories to her stuffed animals and dreamed of becoming a teacher like Miss Rodriguez at the elementary school. Subject was last seen at approximately 3:30 p.m. on Tuesday, October 15th, leaving the Coal Valley Elementary School grounds. Subject was wearing a pink winter coat, blue jeans, and black sneakers. No witnesses to subject's disappearance after leaving school property. Rosa had memorized every word, every detail, every cold fact that failed to explain how a child could simply vanish between the school and home on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She had demanded more investigation, more resources, more everything from the local police department. But Sheriff Stone had made it clear that missing children from poor families and dying towns didn't merit the same attention as other cases. Newspaper clippings filled the bottom of the box. Articles about other missing children from counties across the region. Rosa had started collecting them after Sophia's disappearance, searching for patterns, connections, anything that might explain the inexplicable. 12 children in 3 years, all from rural communities, all from families without political connections or financial resources to demand answers. But the article that haunted Rosa most was the smallest, a brief paragraph buried on page 6 of the Coal Valley Gazette, reporting Sophia's disappearance like it was no more significant than a lost pet. Local girl missing. Read the headline, as if Sophia were just another statistic, instead of a little girl who sang in the church choir and made friendship bracelets for everyone in her class. Rosa's mind drifted back to that last morning, replaying it frame by frame like a movie she couldn't stop watching. It had been such an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that passes without leaving any impression, until tragedy transforms it into something you'll remember forever. Rosa had been getting ready for a doctor's appointment, running late, as usual, trying to juggle too many responsibilities with too few hands. "Mama, we found something special near the old mining office," Sophia had announced over breakfast, her dark eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's really, really cool. I want to show Emma and Ella when they get home from school." "That's nice, mija," Rosa had replied absently, focused on finding her purse and making sure she had all the necessary paperwork for her appointment. "Just be careful around those old buildings." "Can we go there together tomorrow?" "All of us," Sophia had pressed, bouncing in her chair the way she always did when something excited her. "We'll see," Rosa had answered, the automatic parent response that meant maybe, probably, if nothing more important, growing stack of past due notices on the kitchen table. She hadn't been thinking that this might be the last conversation she would ever have with her oldest daughter. That phrase, "we'll see," had become the soundtrack to Rosa's guilt. If she had paid attention, if she had asked what Sophia had found, if she had insisted on walking her to school that morning instead of letting her go with friends, if she had made different choices, spoken different words, been a different kind of mother. After Sophia disappeared, Rosa had spent every penny of their meager savings on private investigators who promised results but delivered only expensive disappointment. She had walked every inch of Coal Valley and the surrounding hills, calling Sophia's name until her voice gave out and her feet bled inside her worn boots. She had organized search parties, printed flyers, begged everyone she met to keep watching, keep hoping, keep looking for a little girl in a pink coat who might still be out there somewhere. The cancer diagnosis had come exactly 2 years after Sophia's disappearance, as if Rosa's body had been counting down to its own surrender. The doctor had used words like aggressive and advanced, but Rosa knew the truth. Heartbreak was a disease that attacked from the inside, weakening defenses until other illnesses could take hold. She was dying of grief disguised as cancer, and the chemotherapy couldn't touch the real tumor that was eating her alive. Now every morning after Emma and Ella left for their scrap hunting, Rosa performed the same ritual. She lit a small candle, a votive she'd bought from the church gift shop, and placed it on the windowsill where Sophia used to sit and read her picture books. "Mama's still looking for you, Mitya," she whispered to the flame, her voice breaking on words she'd spoken 1,000 times. "Every day I'm still looking." The candle flickered in the draft from the old window, its light barely visible in the growing daylight. But Rosa watched it burn, imagining it as a beacon that might somehow guide her lost daughter home. Max remembered the taste of his own blood on the day his old life ended and his new purpose began. The metallic tang had filled his mouth as the bullet grazed his skull, leaving him dizzy and disoriented in the chaos of the drug raid gone wrong. He'd been 5 years old then, in his prime as a canine officer, trained to detect narcotics with a precision that had made him one of the county's most reliable assets. The seizures started 3 days after the shooting. Grand mal episodes that would strike without warning, turning his powerful body into something beyond his control. The veterinarians explained it in terms he couldn't understand. But Max knew what it meant in the language that mattered. He could no longer be trusted to keep his human partners safe. A police dog who might as abandonment. The kennel at the county facility was clean and well-maintained, but it wasn't work, wasn't purpose, wasn't the partnership that had given his life meaning. He spent his days lying on a concrete floor, surrounded by other discarded law enforcement animals, waiting for nothing. Then Sophia Martinez had walked into his life like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. She was 5 years old, all enormous dark eyes and fearless curiosity, following her mother through the county adoption program for retired working dogs. While Rosa filled out paperwork and discussed Max's medical needs with the facility coordinator, Sophia had approached his kennel with a kind of calm confidence that instantly marked her as special. "Hi, big dog," she'd whispered, pressing her small face against the chain-link fence. "Are you sad?" Max had lifted his massive head, studying this tiny human who seemed to see straight into his wounded soul. Most people looked at him and saw his scars, the torn ear, the slightly unfocused look in his eyes that spoke of neurological damage. But Sophia saw something else entirely. "Mama, this one's hurt inside like me," Sophia had announced with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Can we take him home?" Rosa had hesitated, concerned about the medical expenses, the responsibility, the challenge of caring for a large dog while raising 3 young daughters alone. But something in Sophia's voice, some note of recognition and need, had made the decision for her. The first weeks had been an adjustment period that tested everyone's patience. Max's seizures came randomly, sometimes triggered by stress, sometimes by nothing at all. Sophia would find him shaking on the kitchen floor, his body convulsing beyond control, and instead of running away in fear, she would sit beside him and sing lullabies until the episode passed. "It's okay, Max," she would whisper, her small hand resting gently on his fur. "I get scared sometimes too, but it always gets better." Sophia spent hours brushing his coat, talking to him in a steady stream of 8-year-old chatter that somehow made more sense than any adult conversation. She read him picture books, shared her snacks, and insisted that he sleep on a blanket beside her bed because everyone needs someone to watch over them at night. Slowly, Max's seizures became less frequent. Whether it was the medication, the reduction in stress, or simply the healing power of unconditional love, something in Sophia's presence stabilized the damaged pathways in his brain. The episodes didn't disappear entirely, but they became manageable, predictable, less like lightning strikes and more like weather patterns he could sense approaching. For 3 years, Max lived in a state of contentment he'd never known was possible. His days were structured. His nights were spent on guard duty, his senses tuned to every sound that might threaten his chosen family. Then came the night that shattered everything. Max knew something was wrong before any human in the household understood the magnitude of the catastrophe. Sophia's scent was fading from the house, not gradually, as it would if she were simply away at school, but abruptly, completely, as if she had been erased from existence. He scratched at doors, whined at windows, and howled with a grief that seemed to emanate from the deepest parts of his soul. When the search parties organized, Max led them in frantic circles, following scent trails that started strong and then simply vanished, as if Sophia had been lifted into the air and carried away by forces that left no trace on the ground. The searchers praised his efforts, assuming he was doing his best with a trail gone cold. But Max knew something they didn't. The scent hadn't faded naturally. It had been deliberately obscured, masked by chemicals and techniques that spoke of planning, preparation, malicious intent. His failure to save Sophia transformed him from family pet back into guardian, but with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He appointed himself protector of the remaining Martinez family members, a role he approached with the dedication of a soldier on a sacred mission. His seizures, already rare, became almost non-existent, as if his brain had reorganized itself around this new purpose. Every night, Max patrolled their property with military precision, checking corners and boundaries, memorizing the positions of every family member before allowing himself to rest. He refused to sleep unless he could see all 3 of them, Rosa in her bedroom, Emma and Ella in theirs, positioned so that any threat would have to go through him first. When strangers approached the house, Max positioned himself between them and the twins, his body language shifting into the alert posture that had once made drug dealers think twice about running. He never showed aggression. Rosa had taught him that fear was a luxury they couldn't afford, but his presence alone was usually enough to discourage unwanted attention. Max had developed an entire vocabulary of signals to communicate danger levels to Emma and Ella. A slight stiffening meant, "Pay attention." Ears forward and head lowered meant, "Be ready to move." A low growl, almost inaudible, meant, "Get behind me now." The twins had learned to read these signals with the fluency of children, whose survival might depend on understanding their protector's warnings. But the most painful part of Max's new existence was the knowledge he couldn't share. His nose told him stories that human investigation had missed. His instincts painted pictures that no one else could see. He knew Sophia hadn't run away, hadn't gotten lost, hadn't suffered some innocent accident. The scents and signs all pointed to something deliberate. On quiet nights, Max would lie awake, listening to Rosa cry softly in her bedroom, to Emma and Ella whispering their fears to each other across their shared room. He carried the weight of knowing that Sophia was still out there somewhere, still needing rescue, still calling for help that he hadn't been able to provide when it mattered most. His love for Sophia lived on in his devotion to Emma and Ella, transferred but not diminished. Every step they took, every breath they drew, every laugh they managed despite their grief was a victory against the forces that had taken their sister. Max had failed once, and that failure would haunt him forever, but he would not fail again. As the morning sun climbed higher over Coal Valley, Max continued his vigilant watch over the twins, his senses alert to every sound and movement in their environment. Somewhere out there, danger was waiting. Somewhere out there, evil was planning its next move. And somewhere out there, a little girl in a pink coat was still calling for rescue. Max would be ready. December in Coal Valley wielded cold like a weapon. and this morning it was particularly vicious. The air itself seemed crystallized, each breath burning Emma and Ella's lungs as they walked toward the railroad tracks. This wasn't the soft, forgiving cold of autumn's end, but winter's declaration of war, a dry, penetrating chill that made metal tools stick to skin like frozen magnets and turned every exhale into a small cloud of ice crystals that sparkled briefly before disappearing into the gray morning. Emma pulled her two large gloves tighter, feeling the thick fabric bunch around her small fingers as she gripped the canvas bag. The cold made everything more difficult. Metal became painful to touch, zippers fought against stiff fingers, and even blinking felt like an effort as her eyelashes threatened to freeze together. But cold was just another obstacle to overcome, like hunger or worry or the constant ache of missing Sophia. They had learned to work around obstacles. The twins moved through their familiar territory with the practiced efficiency of professionals, their 3 years of necessity having transformed them into expert scavengers. Emma's eyes automatically swept the ground for the distinctive reddish-green pachna of oxidized copper, the metal that brought the highest prices at the recycling center. She could spot valuable copper wire from 20 feet away, distinguish between the profitable heavy-gauge stuff and the thin household wiring that barely earned pocket change. Ella specialized in aluminum, her sharp eyes trained to catch the silvery glint that marked everything from discarded soda cans to complex mechanical parts. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify aluminum alloys, knowing which pieces would weigh in at premium rates and which were contaminated with steel or other metals that reduced their value. They worked in comfortable silence, their unspoken division of labor as natural as breathing. Emma would investigate anything that looked like copper, while Ella checked aluminum prospects. When they found mixed metal items, they collaborated to determine whether the piece was worth carrying or should be left for some other scavenger to discover. Max moved through the industrial graveyard like the law enforcement professional he had once been, his patrol patterns systematic and thorough. Even retirement hadn't dimmed his instincts. He still worked corners and shadows with the methodical attention of a dog trained to detect hidden dangers. His nose swept constantly, cataloging scents both familiar and foreign, building a three-dimensional map of their environment that no human could match. The retired canine's movements were poetry in motion, head low but alert, ears swiveling to track sounds the twins couldn't hear, his powerful body covering ground with the economical gait of an animal bred for endurance. Every few minutes he would pause to check on his charges, his brown eyes meeting theirs in the silent communication that had developed over years of shared adventures. Despite the harsh conditions and their serious purpose, Emma and Ella had found ways to inject play into their survival routine. They competed to see who could find the biggest single piece of metal, turning their search into a treasure hunt with running commentary on their discoveries. "Look at this," Ella whispered excitedly, holding up a twisted piece of aluminum that might once have been part of a mining cart. "I bet this weighs at least 2 pounds. Emma examined the find with professional interest. "Maybe more. And see how clean it is? No rust, no contamination. That's good money right there." They created elaborate backstories for some of their discoveries, spinning tales about the object's previous lives in the mines. A bent gear became part of a machine that had extracted tons of coal from deep beneath the earth. A section of copper tubing had once carried precious water to thirsty miners working far from sunlight. These stories made their work feel like archaeology rather than scavenging, as if they were uncovering the valley's industrial history, one piece at a time. But as the morning progressed, both twins began to notice something unusual in Max's behavior. The dog kept pausing to stare toward the eastern section of railroad tracks, the area they typically avoided, because of unstable ground and dangerous debris. His body language spoke of intense interest mixed with caution, as if something in that direction was pulling at his attention, but also triggering his protective instincts. The winter air played tricks with sound, making everything seem both muffled and amplified at the same time. Their footsteps echoed strangely against the empty grain silos that dotted the landscape, like concrete monuments to Coal Valley's defunct agricultural dreams. The wind whistled through abandoned structures with a haunting melody that made the hair on the back of Emma's neck stand up. Every noise seemed magnified in the crystalline air, the scrape of their boots on frozen gravel, the metallic clink of tools shifting in their bag, the distant whistle of wind through mine shafts that had been sealed years ago. Sound traveled differently in the cold, bouncing off hard surfaces and carrying farther than expected, creating an auditory landscape that felt alien despite its familiarity. "Maybe we should check the eastern tracks today," Ella suggested suddenly, her breath forming a small cloud as she spoke. "Mama said sometimes the good metal ends up in places you don't expect." Emma felt an inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the December cold. The eastern section had always felt wrong somehow, not just dangerous because of the unstable ground, but wrong in a deeper way that her 8-year-old mind couldn't articulate. Her protective instincts, honed by years of looking after her twin sister, screamed warnings that she couldn't ignore. "I don't know," Emma replied carefully. "The ground over there is really bad, and Max keeps looking that way like something's bothering him." As if summoned by his name, Max turned from his latest examination of interesting scents to fix both girls with a stare that seemed almost human in its intensity. His brown eyes held a weight of knowledge that made Emma's stomach clench with sudden anxiety. "Just this once," Ella pressed, her natural curiosity overriding her usual caution. "We've never really explored that area. There might be something amazing over there." Emma looked toward the eastern tracks, where morning shadows stretched longer and darker than they should have, where the wind seemed to carry sounds that made no sense, where Max's attention kept returning like a compass needle drawn to magnetic north. Something was waiting for them in that direction, something that would change everything. And despite every instinct telling her to turn around and head home, Emma found herself nodding agreement. The change in Max happened between one heartbeat and the next, so sudden and complete that Emma felt her own pulse stutter in response. The retired German shepherd froze mid-step, his powerful body going rigid in the classic canine alert position that had once made him one of the county's most valuable assets. Head low, ears thrust forward like radar dishes, one front paw raised and trembling with tension, Max had shifted from family pet to professional law enforcement officer in the space of a single second. Emma and Ella stopped walking immediately, their own bodies responding to signals that had been programmed into them through 3 years of learning to read their protector's moods. This wasn't Max's interesting smell posture, the relaxed curiosity he showed when investigating a new scent. This wasn't even his potential threat stance, the heightened alertness he displayed when strangers approached their property. This was his danger position, and the options of the twins had never seen him this focused, this completely consumed by whatever his enhanced senses were detecting. Max's nostrils flared as he processed information that no human could access. His trained nose was dissecting a complex bouquet of scents that painted a story of fear and violence. There was the sharp, acidic smell of fear sweat, the distinctive odor that humans produced when genuine terror flooded their systems with adrenaline. Layered beneath that was the fibrous scent of rope, not the old weathered hemp they sometimes found among discarded mining equipment, but newer nylon rope that carried the chemical signatures of recent manufacture. But most disturbing was the metallic smell that wasn't the familiar oxidation of abandoned scrap metal. This was the copper penny scent of fresh blood, mixed with something else that Max's training had taught him to recognize, the particular metallic taste that came from restraints, from handcuffs or chains that had been used to bind someone against their will. The winter landscape amplified Max's alertness, making every detail more significant, more ominous. The longer shadows cast by the December sun created pools of darkness that could hide threats, while the hard-packed snow muffled sounds in ways that made normal audio cues unreliable. Max's breathing had shifted to the shallow, controlled pattern of a working police dog, his entire being focused on processing the information his senses were providing. Emma felt her protective instincts surge as she watched Max's behavior. After 3 years of learning to read his signals, she knew the difference between his various states of alertness as clearly as if he could speak. This level of focused intensity meant genuine danger, the kind that had once sent his human partners reaching for their weapons. "What is it, boy?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that whistled through the abandoned grain elevator. "What do you smell?" But even as she asked the question, Emma's own intuition was screaming warnings that her 8-year-old mind struggled to interpret. Every survival instinct she had developed during their years of scavenging was telling her to grab Ella's hand and run back toward home, to put as much distance as possible between them and whatever was triggering Max's professional alertness. Ella, however, was fascinated by the dramatic change in their canine companion. She had always been the more curious of the twins, the one who pushed boundaries and asked uncomfortable questions. Watching Max shift into law enforcement mode was like seeing a different animal entirely, and her scientific mind wanted to understand what was happening. "Why is he standing like that?" Ella whispered, moving closer to Emma for comfort while keeping her eyes fixed on Max. "He looks like really wrong." Max began moving forward, but his advance was nothing like his usual comfortable trot. This was the careful, purposeful movement of a professional investigating a potential crime scene. Each step was deliberate, calculated to minimize noise while maximizing his ability to gather information. His head swayed slightly from side to side, following scent trails that were invisible to human senses but as clear as road maps to his trained nose. The twins followed at a distance, their own movements unconsciously mimicking Max's careful approach. The winter air made their breathing sound unnaturally loud, each exhale creating small puffs of vapor that seemed to hang in the air like question marks. Emma's heart was beating so hard she was sure it must be audible, the sound of her own pulse drowning out everything else. The landscape around them seemed to respond to the growing tension, shadows appearing deeper and more threatening, familiar landmarks taking on sinister qualities in the strange light of the December morning. The grain silos that had always been merely empty cylinders now looked like watchtowers, their dark openings like eyes, watching their approach. Even the railroad tracks seemed different, their parallel lines stretching toward uncertainty, rather than simply defining the path to their usual scavenging grounds. "I think we should go back," Emma said suddenly, her protective instincts overwhelming her curiosity. Something's wrong, really wrong. But even as she spoke, Emma found herself unable to stop following Max's determined advance. The retired K9 was operating on instincts that had been honed by years of training and experience, and those instincts were pulling him forward with a force that seemed to create its own gravity field. Whatever he had detected was drawing him onward with the inexorable pull of a magnet attracting iron filings. Ella grabbed Emma's hand, seeking comfort in physical contact, while her own fascination kept her moving forward. "What do you think he found?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I don't want to know," Emma replied honestly, but her feet kept moving, following their protector toward whatever revelation was waiting in the shadows ahead. Max's ears swiveled constantly, tracking sounds that the twins couldn't hear, processing audio information that painted detailed pictures of their environment. His tail, usually relaxed and occasionally wagging, now hung straight down in the rigid position that marked extreme alertness. Every line of his body spoke of controlled power, ready to explode into action at a moment's notice. The approach felt endless, each step building tension like a spring being wound, tighter and tighter. Emma's mouth had gone dry despite the cold air, and she could feel sweat forming beneath her winter coat, despite the freezing temperature. Her body was preparing for fight or flight, flooding her system with adrenaline that made every sensation more vivid, every detail more significant. Behind them, their normal world of scrap hunting and survival seemed like a memory from childhood, already distant and irrelevant. Ahead lay something that would change everything, though neither twin yet understood the magnitude of what they were about to discover. Max paused again, his entire body trembling with the effort of controlled alertness. Then he looked back at Emma and Ella with eyes that seemed to hold an almost human understanding of the gravity of the moment. This was it. Whatever he had been tracking, whatever his senses had detected, was just ahead. The human form sprawled across the railroad tracks, hit Emma's consciousness like a physical blow. The wrongness of it so profound that her brain simply refused to process what her eyes were seeing. In all their years of scavenging through Coal Valley's industrial ruins, they had found many things: discarded machinery, abandoned belongings, the occasional dead animal that had wandered too close to dangerous structures. But never this. Never a person lying motionless on the very tracks, where trains still thundered through without warning. At first glance, Emma's 8-year-old mind tried to make sense of the scene in the safest possible terms. Maybe it was just a drunk who had passed out, one of the valley's scattered residents who had chosen alcohol over reality and found himself in a dangerous place. Maybe it was someone who had fallen and been injured, someone who needed help but wasn't in immediate mortal danger. But as her vision adjusted to the shadows cast by the abandoned grain elevator, the details began to emerge with horrible clarity. The figure wasn't just lying on the tracks. He was positioned across them with deliberate precision, his body placed exactly where the next freight train would inflict maximum damage. And this wasn't some random vagrant or unfortunate drunk. This was a police officer. The tan uniform was unmistakable, even stained and wrinkled as it was from hours of exposure to the elements. A badge caught the pale December sunlight, its metallic surface reflecting light like a beacon of authority. Rendered helpless, but most disturbing of all were the restraints. Thick nylon rope binding his wrists and ankles with professional efficiency, a dark cloth gagging his mouth so completely that only muffled sounds could escape. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a medical emergency. This was deliberate, calculated, evil in its precision. Emma's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Tears sprang to her eyes as her 8-year-old mind struggled to process the magnitude of what she was witnessing. Her legs went weak, trembling so violently that she had to grip Ella's arm for support. The canvas bag slipped from her nerveless fingers, hitting the frozen ground with a metallic clatter that seemed unnaturally loud in the winter air. "Oh God," Emma whispered, her voice breaking on the words, "Oh God, oh God, oh God." But while Emma froze in shock and terror, Ella's response was completely different. The more practical of the twins, the one who had always been quicker to action than to emotion, immediately began moving forward despite her own fear. Her mind had processed the essential facts with frightening clarity. There was a person in mortal danger. There might be a train coming, and every second of delay could mean the difference between life and death. "Emma, come on," Ella called, already running toward the bound figure. "We have to help him." Max's response was pure professional instinct, overlaid with the protective devotion that had defined his retirement years. The retired K9 circled the victim with systematic thoroughness, his nose working to detect any other threats in the immediate area. His training was asserting itself, despite years away from active duty, and that training told him to secure the perimeter before focusing on the primary situation. Finding no immediate external threats, Max turned his attention to the bonds that held the police officer. His brown eyes assessed the restraints with the clinical evaluation of a dog who had been trained to assist in exactly these kinds of scenarios. The knots were tight, but not impossible. The rope thick, but not beyond the capabilities of determined human fingers, aided by canine teeth. As Max circled closer to examine the restraints, the bound figure stirred slightly. Lieutenant David Chen's consciousness was slowly returning from the drugged haze that had kept him docile during his transport and positioning. The cold had actually helped bring him around, the December chill penetrating through the fog of whatever chemicals had been used to subdue him. His first sensation was the bite of nylon rope against his wrists, the circulation-cutting tightness that spoke of professional restraint techniques. His second was the metallic taste of fear in his mouth, mixing with whatever drug residue remained in his system. But his third sensation was the most terrifying of all, the subtle vibration in the railroad tracks beneath his body, the rhythmic tremor that meant an approaching train. Chen's eyes snapped open, focusing with desperate intensity on the two small girls who had appeared like angels in his peripheral vision. Through the gag that prevented coherent speech, he tried to communicate the urgency of their situation, his muffled voice carrying all the authority he could muster while bound and helpless. "Mmph, mmph." The sounds were barely human, but the desperation behind them was unmistakable. Emma finally broke through her paralysis, her protective instincts for Ella overriding her terror. If her sister was going to rush into danger, then Emma would be right beside her, ready to help or die trying. She stumbled forward on legs that still felt like rubber, reaching the bound police officer just as Ella began examining the knots around his ankles. "The rope's really tight," Ella reported, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of their situation. "But I think we can get it." The vibration in the tracks was growing stronger now, accompanied by the first distant rumble of an approaching freight train. The sound was still far away, but in the crystal-clear air of a December morning, sound carried farther than usual. They might have minutes, or they might have less. Chen's struggles intensified as he felt the train's approach through the steel rails pressed against his body. The vibration was growing stronger, more insistent, carrying the promise of tons of locomotive power that would reduce his body to nothing more than a stain on the tracks. "We have to hurry," Emma said, her voice high and thin with panic, but determined despite her fear. "I can hear the train." The three of them, 2 8-year-old girls and 1 retired police dog, began their desperate race against time and physics. Emma attacked the knots at Chen's wrists, while Ella worked on his ankles, their small fingers made clumsy by cold and terror, but driven by the kind of determination that only emerges in moments of absolute crisis. Max positioned himself at Chen's head, using his teeth to grip and pull at the cloth gag with careful precision. His police training had included scenarios exactly like this one, and muscle memory was taking over where conscious thought might have failed. In the distance, the train's whistle began its warning song, a mournful sound that echoed across Coal Valley like a death knell. The vibration in the tracks was no longer subtle. It was a rhythmic pounding that spoke of massive weight moving at deadly speed. Time had become their enemy, measured now not in minutes, but in heartbeats, not in thoughts, but in the desperate movements of small hands working to save a life. The rescue had begun. The world exploded into sensory chaos as the approaching coal train transformed from distant threat to immediate reality. What had been a subtle vibration in the railroad tracks became a rhythmic pounding that made the steel rails sing with metallic harmonics, each pulse carrying the promise of tons of unstoppable momentum bearing down on them. The sound was no longer just noise. It was physics made audible, the voice of mass and velocity combining into something that could not be reasoned with, could not be stopped, could only be escaped. Emma's small fingers attacked the nylon rope around Chen's ankles with desperate efficiency, but the bonds had tightened from his earlier struggles, turning the knots into puzzles that seemed designed to resist solution. The rope was new, strong, tied by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Each strand was pulled of blood, marking her desperate efforts. The cold made her fingers clumsy, stiff with December's bite, but she kept working with the focused intensity of a child who understood that failure meant death. Ella had claimed the more complex task of freeing Chen's wrists, her naturally nimble fingers working at knots that had been pulled impossibly tight. The positioning of his arms made the work awkward, forcing her to contort her small body at uncomfortable angles to get proper leverage. But Ella possessed the kind of stubborn determination that had kept the Martinez family alive through 3 years of poverty and loss, and she applied every ounce of that will to the rope that bound their unexpected victim. "I can feel it loosening," Ella reported through gritted teeth. Though she might have been lying to maintain morale, the knots seemed to mock her efforts, appearing to give way only to tighten again when she tried to work the rope free. Her fingers were numb with cold, her hands shaking from adrenaline, but she refused to acknowledge the possibility of failure. Max approached the cloth gag with the methodical precision that had once made him one of the county's most valuable canine officers. His training was asserting itself despite years of retirement, muscle memory guiding his movements as he gripped the fabric with careful teeth. Police dogs were taught to remove restraints without causing additional injury, and those lessons remained embedded in his consciousness, like grooves worn into stone. The German shepherd's powerful jaws worked at the gag with surgical precision, his teeth finding purchase on the cloth while his head twisted in the exact motions he had been taught years ago. The fabric was thick, bound tightly around Chen's head, but Max's determination matched that of his human companions. This was what he had been trained for, what he had been born for, protecting the innocent and defeating evil through skill and courage. Chen himself was fighting to return to full consciousness, the combination of cold air and desperate circumstances burning through whatever drugs had been used to subdue him. His vision was clearing, his thoughts becoming more coherent, and with that clarity came the full understanding of his situation. The vibration in the tracks beneath his body was no longer ignorable. He could feel the approaching train like an earthquake building in the earth. The headlight appeared first, a brilliant white eye piercing the gray December morning as the locomotive rounded the distant curve. The sight hit all of them like a physical blow, transforming their desperate rescue from abstract urgency to concrete countdown. The train was perhaps a mile away, moving at freight speed through Coal Valley's empty landscape, its engineer probably thinking about coffee and the next town, rather than the drama unfolding on the tracks ahead. The engineer's horn began as some mechanical god demanding attention. The sound was meant to alert vehicles at crossings, to warn away trespassers, to announce the train's passage to anyone who might be concerned. But to Emma, Ella, Max, and Chen, it sounded like a funeral dirge counting down their final moments. Emma's tears were freezing on her cheeks as she worked, the salt water forming tiny ice crystals that clung to her skin like frozen prayers. Her small hands were shaking so violently that she could barely maintain her grip on the rope. But giving up was not an option. Somewhere, in the back of her mind, she was thinking about Sophia, about her mother dying of cancer, about all the loss their family had already endured. She would not let death claim another victim, not when she had the power to prevent it. The wind picked up loose snow, swirling it around them in miniature tornadoes that made it even harder to see their work. The temperature seemed to be dropping by the minute, as if the approaching train was pulling winter behind it like a freight car loaded with Arctic air. Their breath formed larger and larger clouds as their breathing quickened, creating a fog that obscured their vision just when they needed clarity most. Ella's fingers were bleeding now too, torn by the rough rope and scraped by her desperate efforts. But she could feel something changing in the knots around Chen's wrists. A subtle loosening that spoke of approaching victory. "Almost got it," she whispered, more to herself than to the others, her voice a mantra of determination. Chen was trying to help, despite his weakened condition, flexing his hands and arms whenever possible to create slack in the rope, working his jaw against the gag to give Max better angles for his rescue efforts. His police training was asserting itself, providing tactical assessment, even in his compromised state. The train was getting closer. Time was running out. But these children and this remarkable dog were giving him a chance at life. Then, like a prayer being answered by a god who specialized in last-minute miracles, Emma felt the knot around Chen's ankle finally give way. The rope unwound with sudden completeness, releasing his leg with a rush of restored circulation. At almost the same moment, Ella's stubborn persistence was rewarded as the bonds around his wrists finally loosened enough for Max to pull the restraints free. Chen could move his arms. Adrenaline is the great equalizer, the chemical miracle that allows 8-year-old girls to lift grown men weight after hours of cold exposure and whatever drugs had been used to subdue him. His head trauma from the initial attack had left him disoriented, his legs weak and uncooperative despite his growing consciousness. "Can you stand?" Emma asked urgently, trying to help Chen into a sitting position as the train's rumble grew ever louder. Chen attempted to comply, his police training demanding that he contribute to his own rescue, but his body betrayed him. His legs felt like rubber, his sense of balance compromised by injury and exposure. He managed to rise to his knees, but immediately swayed dangerously, his vision swimming with vertigo that threatened to send him collapsing back onto the tracks. "I'll try," he gasped, his voice hoarse from the gag and dehydration. "Just get me started and I'll—" But there was no time for gradual recovery. The train's headlight was growing brighter, larger, more insistent with each passing second. They needed to move Chen's body the width of 2 railroad tracks, plus enough clearance to avoid the locomotive's wind blast. And they needed to do it now. Emma grabbed Chen's left arm, her small hands barely able to circle his wrist, while Ella seized his right arm with identical determination. Max positioned himself at Chen's back, his powerful jaws gripping the thick fabric of the police uniform jacket with careful precision. The retired K-9 knew exactly how much pressure to apply, enough to provide substantial pulling force without tearing the fabric or injuring the man he was trying to save. Their first coordinated pull moved Chen perhaps 6 inches, a pathetically small distance that highlighted the magnitude of their challenge. The gravel beneath the railroad tracks shifted under their feet, providing uncertain footing that threatened to send them all tumbling. Chen tried to help by pushing with his legs, but his efforts were uncoordinated, his muscles still compromised by whatever chemicals had been used against him. "Again," Ella commanded, her 8-year-old voice carrying the authority of someone who refused to accept defeat. "Harder this time." They pulled again, gaining perhaps another foot of clearance. The progress felt agonizingly slow compared to the rapid approach of the train, which had now closed to perhaps half a mile. The locomotive's bulk was clearly visible, its massive form growing larger with every second that passed. Each foot gained felt like a mile traveled, each inch of progress requiring superhuman effort from their small bodies. Emma's shoulders were screaming with pain, her grip on Chen's arm slipping as sweat mixed with prime-of-life power. His retirement years falling away like shed skin as he channeled every ounce of his training and devotion into this moment of ultimate purpose. The engineer had spotted them now, his train too close and moving too fast for emergency braking to be effective. The horn began blasting continuously, a desperate warning that echoed across Coal Valley like the scream of some wounded giant. Through the locomotive's windshield, Emma caught a glimpse of the engineer's face, his expression frozen in horror as he realized what was happening on the tracks ahead. The emergency brakes engaged with a sound like the world tearing in half, metal grinding against metal in a futile attempt to defeat momentum and physics. Sparks flew from the wheels as they locked against the rails, but the train's massive weight carried it forward with relentless inevitability. Chen's body cleared the first rail, just as the locomotive's shadow fell across them. The proximity was so close that Emma could smell the diesel exhaust, could feel the heat radiating from the massive engine that was bearing down on them with the force of an avalanche. "One more pull!" Ella screamed over the cacophony of screeching brakes and blasting horn. "We can do this!" They summoned strength they didn't know they possessed, strength that came from somewhere beyond muscle and bone, beyond the physical limitations of their young bodies. Emma felt her small frame channel power that seemed divine in its origin, as if angels were lending their might to her desperate efforts. Ella's grip on Chen's arm became absolute, her fingers locked with the determination of someone who would die before letting go. Max's final pull was a thing of beauty, his entire body coordinating in the fluid motion of a predator bringing down prey. Except this time, he was hunting salvation instead of capture. His rear legs drove against the gravel with explosive force, while his neck muscles contracted with the power of hydraulics. Chen's body cleared the second rail, with perhaps 2 seconds to spare, his weight collapsing into the gravel beside the tracks just as the locomotive thundered past. The wind blast hit them like a physical wall, sending them tumbling in an exhausted heap of arms and legs and dog fur. The noise was overwhelming, a combination of diesel engine, grinding brakes, and rushing air that seemed to press against their eardrums like physical weight. They lay gasping in the gravel as car after car of coal thundered past, the train's length seeming infinite as they struggled to process what had just happened. Emma's arms felt like overcooked spaghetti, her small body shaking with exhaustion and delayed shock. Ella was crying now, the tears finally coming. Brown eyes were bright with the satisfaction of a job well done, but his alertness remained absolute. The immediate crisis was over, but his protective instincts were telling him that the danger itself had not passed. As the train's final car disappeared around the curve, silence fell over Coal Valley like a blanket made of shock and relief. The sudden absence of noise was almost as overwhelming as the cacophony had been, leaving their ears ringing and their voices sounding strange and distant when they finally began to speak. They had done it. Against all odds, defying physics and probability, 2 8-year-old girls and a retired police dog had saved a man's life, with nothing but determination and love. Chen's return to full consciousness was like watching someone surface from deep water, his awareness rising through layers of confusion and disorientation until he finally broke through to complete understanding of his situation. His dark eyes blinked rapidly, trying to focus on the small faces hovering over him with expressions of concern and exhaustion. For a moment, he wondered if he was hallucinating, if the trauma of his ordeal had fractured his grip on reality. 2 children, 2 little girls, who looked like they belonged in elementary school, not in the middle of a life-or-death rescue operation. Their faces were streaked with tears and grime, their small hands bloody from their desperate efforts to free him from the restraints. Behind them, a German shepherd with intelligent brown eyes watched him with the professional assessment of a fellow law enforcement officer. "Who are you?" Chen whispered, his voice barely recognizable even to himself. Hours of exposure to cold and the after effects of whatever drugs had been used on him had left his throat raw and painful. Why did you? Emma's delayed shock was hitting her with the force of a tsunami. Her small body began shaking uncontrollably, not from cold, but from the crushing realization of what they had just experienced. She had stared death in the face, and somehow emerged victorious, but her 8-year-old mind was struggling to process the magnitude of what that meant. The shaking started in her hands and spread through her entire frame until she was trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Ella wrapped her arms around her twin sister, providing the kind of comfort that could only come from someone who had shared every moment of the terrifying ordeal. But even as she comforted Emma, Ella felt a surge of pride that was entirely justified. They had done something extraordinary, something that would have challenged adult emergency responders. 2 little girls from Coal Valley had looked at an impossible situation and decided that impossible was just another word for challenging. "I'm Ella Martinez," she said with the kind of formal politeness their mother had drilled into them. Into his post-crisis routine, a behavior pattern that had been drilled into him during his years of active service. He methodically checked each person for injuries, his nose working to detect blood loss or other trauma that might require immediate attention. His assessment was professional and thorough. Chen had bruising and possible head trauma, but no life-threatening injuries. Emma was experiencing shock, but was physically unharmed. Ella was exhausted but stable. Having completed his medical evaluation, Max positioned himself between his family and the direction from which threats might approach. His body language spoke of continuing vigilance, a recognition that whatever forces had put Chen on those railroad tracks were still out there, still dangerous, still capable of striking again. Martinez, Chen repeated, the name triggering something in his memory. Are you related to Sofia Martinez, the little girl who went missing 3 years ago? The question hit both twins like a physical blow. Adults rarely mentioned Sofia directly, usually dancing around the subject with careful euphemisms and uncomfortable silences. Hearing her name spoken aloud by this stranger felt like having a bandage torn off a wound that had never properly healed. "She's our sister," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying a weight of pain that made Chen's heart ache. She was our sister. Chen's professional training kicked in, despite his weakened condition, his mind automatically cataloging details and making connections. He had come to Coal Valley specifically to investigate missing children cases, and Sofia Martinez was one of the names on his list. Meeting her sisters under these circumstances couldn't be coincidence. There were forces at work here that went far beyond random chance. "We need to get you somewhere warm," Ella said with the practical concern that had become second nature to her. She had assessed Chen's condition with the efficiency of someone who had spent years caring for a sick mother, noting the blue tinge around his lips, the way his hands shook from more than just adrenaline. "You're getting hypothermic." Chen tried to stand, his police training demanding that he regain control of the situation. But his body refused to cooperate. The combination of cold exposure, head trauma, and whatever chemicals had been used to subdue him had left him weak and disoriented. His legs trembled when he put weight on them, and his vision swam with vertigo that made the world tilt at dangerous angles. "Easy," Emma said softly, her natural caretaking instincts overriding her shock as she moved to support one of his arms. "Don't try to do too much, too fast." The concern in her voice broke something loose in Chen's chest, an emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm his professional composure. Heroism that restored faith in human nature. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotions he couldn't quite name. "What you did, what you risked, I've never seen anything like it." But even as gratitude flooded through him, Chen's investigative instincts were reasserting themselves. This hadn't been a random crime, hadn't been some spontaneous act of violence. Someone had specifically targeted him, had planned his murder with methodical precision. The fact that he had been investigating missing children cases, including Sofia Martinez, was too significant to be coincidental. "Girls," he said carefully, trying to find words that would convey urgency without causing panic. "The person who did this to me, they're still out there. They wanted me dead because I was investigating something they didn't want discovered." The implications hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. If someone was willing to murder a police officer to protect their secrets, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses. By saving Chen's life, Emma and Ella had painted targets on their own backs. "We need to get to your house," Chen continued, his professional assessment overriding his gratitude. "We need to warn your family, and I need to contact federal authorities. This is bigger than just Coal Valley, bigger than just one missing child." The walk back toward town began with Chen leaning heavily on both girls, his arms draped across their small shoulders as they provided human crutches for his unsteady legs. Max ranged around them in protective patterns, his senses alert for any sign of continuing danger. The German shepherd's body language spoke of recognition, that their ordeal was far from over. They had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. As they made their slow progress across the frozen landscape, all four of them were processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. A routine morning of scrap hunting had become a life-or-death rescue mission. A simple act of kindness had potentially exposed them to mortal danger. And somewhere in the distance, evil forces were already planning their next move in a game where the stakes were measured in human lives. The railroad tracks stretched behind them, empty now but still singing faintly in the winter wind, carrying echoes of the train that had almost claimed another victim. But they had prevented that tragedy, had stood against the darkness, and emerged victorious. Now they had to survive what came next. The front door of the small railroad house burst open, slamming against the wall and scattering ice crystals onto the worn linoleum. Emma and Ella staggered in, supporting a man in a torn police uniform, his face pale and waxy, as if death had been his partner for too many hours. Rosa Martinez looked up from her embroidery, startled only for a heartbeat before something fierce lit in her eyes, burned white-hot. "Dio, what happened?" she demanded, rising with surprising speed. Her eyes swept the scene. Daughters, bruised and bloody from rope burns. A stranger barely standing. "Mama, we found him tied to the railroad tracks," Emma said, voice shaking. "We cut him free just before the train came." Rosa's voice turned commanding. "Sit him down. Emma, quilts from my room. Ella, boil water." She moved to Chen with the precision of a medic, checking for frostbite, concussion, and broken bones. "You're hypothermic," she announced. "Rope burns, head injury. We'll treat you." "Man, I don't want to impose." "Hush. In this house we don't let people suffer when we can help." Even as she tended to him, Rosa's mind catalogued the danger. Someone had deliberately tried to kill a police officer, and that someone was still out there. "Tell me everything," she said, cleaning Chen's wrists. The twins recounted their rescue, voices steadier as the weight was shared. Chen, despite his weakness, noticed Rosa's grace, how she brewed tea, cleaned wounds, and created safety as naturally as breathing. "I need to call this in," Chen murmured. "Later," Rosa said firmly. She drew curtains, locked doors, arranged chairs for clear sight lines, and kept the radio low to mask conversation. Max, their German shepherd, stationed himself at the front window, muscles taut. "You're safe here," Rosa said, with the conviction of someone who would die before letting harm through her door. Chen saw her illness, but also the steel in her gaze. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Courage is all we have left," she replied. "Sometimes it's enough." As evening settled, the oil lamps cast a warm glow. Chen's color returned under Rosa's care and her insistence he eat hot soup. Soon curiosity about the family replaced his exhaustion. "I grew up in San Francisco's Chinatown," he began. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died. She taught me there are two kinds of police officers, the ones who serve themselves and the ones who serve their community." "Why come here?" Ella asked. Chen's tone shifted. 6 months ago, I was assigned to investigate missing children across rural towns. Your daughter, Sofia Martinez was on my list. The name dropped into the room like stone into still water. Rosa set her mending aside. She was our sunshine.
Trouble, Rosa said.
Chen knew it was more than kindness, it was rare heroism. Later, a sudden coughing fit bent Rosa double, blood flecking her handkerchief. "Mama has cancer," Emma said evenly. "Stage 4. "The doctors give me 6 months," Rosa said matter-of-factly. "The treatment's expensive. We collect scrap metal to help pay." Chen's instinct was to help, but he offered it in a way that preserved dignity. "Let me contribute while I'm here. Room and board." "We're not taking handouts," Rosa said. "But fair exchange, that's different." They agreed, both knowing the deeper truth. Rosa was dying, and the girls would soon need someone. "After I'm gone, they'll need someone who understands," Rosa said. "I can't imagine us being separated," Chen replied when the twins asked if Max would stay with them. Rosa gripped his hand. "Promise me you'll remind them they're heroes." "I promise," Chen said, feeling something shift inside him. That night, Rosa tucked her daughters into bed. Chen made his place on the couch, Max settling nearby. The small house, once just a shelter, had expanded to hold one more soul. Outside, the winter stars seemed brighter, as if celebrating strangers becoming family and hope taking root in the unlikeliest soil. 2 days of forced rest had healed much of Chen's body, but not his frustration. Rosa's care had eased the rope burns, reduced the swelling in his head, and restored some strength. Yet every hour of recovery was another hour for whoever tried to kill him to strike again. When Emma and Ella prepared for their morning scrap hunt, Chen insisted on going. "I'm not letting them out of my sight," he said, checking the service weapon that had stayed holstered through his ordeal. "Whoever tried to kill me knows they were involved in my rescue. That makes them targets." Max, the retired canine, seemed to approve. He had studied Chen for 2 days and decided this was a man who would protect the pack. The December air was cold but clear, the kind that sharpened sound. The twins moved with practiced efficiency, but without their usual playful rivalry. Chen walked behind them, eyes scanning every shadow and abandoned structure. The attempt on his life had been professional. People like that rarely left witnesses alive. Ella spotted it first, a water-damaged leather satchel wedged under a collapsed railroad trestle. "It's not scrap, but it might be worth something." "Don't touch it," Chen warned. Using a stick, he opened the buckles. Inside, a hand-drawn map of Coal Valley marked with red ink, a typed list of children's names and dates, and photographs. The map was precise. Rosa kept on the table, stared back at them from among dozens. "That's Sofia," Emma whispered. Chen's stomach clenched. The names confirmed his worst fears. Sofia and 12 others he'd investigated, plus more he hadn't even heard of. Max stiffened, nose working frantically. His agitation told Chen the scents were familiar, likely from the night Sofia vanished. "This isn't just evidence," Chen said. "It's proof Sofia's disappearance was part of a larger operation, and whoever did this is still active." They hurried home. Chen's mind raced. The precision suggested someone with law enforcement or military training, deep knowledge of the valley's geography, and resources to operate for years unseen. His attempted murder hadn't been random. It was meant to silence him. When Rosa saw Sophia's photo, something inside her broke. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing from a place deeper than lungs or heart. I knew it wasn't random. I knew someone took her. Chen knelt beside her. He'd seen grief before, but this was both devastation and vindication. Emma and Ella stood by, small hands on her shoulders, anchors in the storm. "Tell me," Chen urged. Between coughing fits, Rosa described how, a month after Sophia vanished, she began meeting other parents from different towns. They compared notes in church basements and living rooms. Patterns emerged. Similarities in disappearances, missing evidence, and cases dropped without cause. And every time they pressed, local authorities visited with concerns for the safety of their remaining children. "Sheriff Marcus Stone," Chen said. Rosa's eyes hardened. He treated Sophia's case like she wandered off. When I demanded more, he told me maybe I should look at my parenting instead of making accusations. 17 families in 3 states had built a private investigation, documenting patterns, preserving evidence officials ignored. "I need you to reach them," Chen said. "But carefully. Stone has allies everywhere." Emma spoke up. "We want to help. Sophia's our sister." Chen hesitated, but they were already part of this. "All right. We do it smart and safe. No one goes alone." Rosa gripped his hand. "If I don't live to see this end, promise me Sophia will know we never stopped looking." "You'll see her come home," Chen said. "But I swear, they'll know love never gave up." Max pressed his head against Rosa's leg, as if pledging the same. Outside, Coal Valley sagged under winter skies, but inside, the little railroad house, a family was forming around a mission that could reports. Not large enough to trigger alarms, but too precise to be coincidence. "He's been paid to look the other way," Chen muttered. Cross-referencing the map with mining records revealed a vast underground network connecting multiple counties. The red marks matched tunnel access points. Someone's using them to move unseen. "Stone's father was a mine foreman," Rosa said. "Marcus would know every inch of those tunnels." The victim list followed a pattern. Poor families, single parents, no political clout. Children easy to dismiss as runaways. Chen's investigation had been getting close. Close enough for Stone to arrange his murder. "We need federal help," Chen said, "but secure channels only. Stone will hear if we use normal comms." "I can reach my network without electronics," Rosa said. "We've been careful." Max nosed the evidence again, agitated by familiar scents. Chen realized they could use his tracking ability. If they started at the right location, Max might lead them to the children. Rosa's illness added urgency. "If I don't make it, promise Emma and Ella will know Sophia fought to come home." Chen took her hand. "I swear it." Outside, the valley lay under cold stars, as if holding its breath. Inside, they prepared for a fight that was no longer just about one missing girl. It was a reckoning, and it was coming. The encrypted satellite phone felt like a lifeline in Chen's hands as he crouched in the pre-dawn cold behind Rosa's house, breath rising in the December air. Contacting federal authorities required more than standard police protocols, especially with the local sheriff compromised and electronic channels likely monitored. After minutes of encrypted relays, Special Agent Sarah Williams answered, voice steady, alert. "Chen, please tell me you've got something worth the paperwork I'm about to file." They'd worked 3 child trafficking cases together. She was sharp, relentless, and, most importantly, trusted. "I need immediate federal intervention in Coal Valley," Chen said. "Systematic child trafficking, active for at least 3 years. Local law enforcement compromised at the highest level. Sheriff Marcus Stone is directly involved. Someone tried to kill me 3 days ago. I have financial records linking him to 13 disappearances in 3 states." Silence. Then the click of her keys. Evidence package. Maps, victim photos, payment records, and testimony from families silenced by locals. I also have a retired K-9 with scent exposure to the scenes. Could be crucial. I'm sending a child rescue. Said, 18 hours. Keep him alive. Inside, Max lifted his head as Chen entered, reading the change in his handler's energy. The hunt was about to begin. Before dawn, Max led a small reconnaissance team, Chen, 2 undercover FBI agents, and the twins, to a concealed entrance beneath collapsed mining debris. His nose had caught human scents laced with chemicals and fear. "This is it," Chen whispered into his radio. William's voice crackled back. "Proceed with extreme caution. GPS tracking will be intermittent underground." The tunnels were a mix of century-old coal shafts and recent upgrades, fresh wiring, ventilation, and security cameras. Max's body language sharpened. The scent trails were fresh. They passed crude living spaces, sleeping bags, food wrappers, a child's stuffed toy. On one wall, Sophia was here, scratched at a 10-year-old's height, with dates after her disappearance. Nearby, crude tunnel maps with arrows. Emma touched the letters, voice shaking. She was here, leaving us messages. Max froze, then pulled toward the eastern branch, urgency in every movement. But Chen's instincts said they'd reached the limit of safe recon. "We have enough for planning. Pull back." Emerging into the cold, Chen knew it felt like abandoning the children again, but without backup. Charging ahead would help no one. By the time they returned, Rosa's yard was a federal command post. Williams coordinated agents and analysts mapping Stone's network. 17 confirmed facilities across 3 states. Coal Valley, a central processing hub. Estimated 200 victims in 5 years, Williams said grimly. The twins absorbed it with the same sober maturity they'd shown all along. Rosa, wrapped in blankets, listened to every word. Her network of grieving parents had been right all along. Now it was backed by federal proof. Local complicity ran deep, officials paid off or blackmailed, businesses looking the other way. Surveillance showed Stone growing desperate, talking about cleaning house and tying up loose ends. Williams knew what that meant. More federal teams arrived through the morning, technical crews, medical staff, rescue units. Max trained with FBI K-9 specialists to translate his scent cues into actionable movements. Rosa's health was failing under the strain. She gripped Chen's hand. "Promise me, if the worst happens, you'll tell Sophia her family never stopped looking." "She'll know," Chen said. "All of them will." By nightfall, agents filled Rosa's living room for the final briefing. "Primary objective, victim rescue," Williams told them. "Secondary, suspect apprehension. If we must choose, save the children first." Max stood beside Chen, muscles taut. Somewhere in the darkness, corner into a federal nerve hub. Agent Williams moved briskly between stations, her voice sharp over encrypted radios as she coordinated hospitals, social services, and trauma teams. Medical teams are in place, she told the task force. These kids have been held for months, some years. They'll need care the moment we get them out. Rosa, wrapped in quilts, sat in her wheelchair. Her illness kept her weak, but her mind was clear. Sophia fears small spaces, she told the entry team. Speak softly, identify yourselves. Don't rush her, she'll panic. Williams folded that into the tactical plan. Emma and Ella would guide rescue teams from a safe distance, their years of exploring the mining district, giving them knowledge no map could match. Max, the retired German shepherd, had slipped back into his police role as if no time had passed, leading the scent operation with unquestioned authority. The blizzard that night cloaked the operation in white silence, but also posed deadly risks to the children underground. Then, Stone struck back. 3 armed men advanced through the snow toward Rosa's house. Chen, expecting it, held defensive positions. Gunfire shattered windows. The twins dove to the floor. In minutes, it was over. 2 attackers dead, 1 in custody. Chen wounded but steady. Martinez's family is secure, he reported. Continue the mission. Max led the way into the tunnels, his senses cutting through darkness no camera could match. The mining complex had been expanded into a permanent prison, reinforced cells, ventilation, electrics, all now stripped of surveillance by federal techs. Stone's guards fought hard, but agents fought harder. Max pressed deeper, his nose guiding them past gunfire to the strongest scent of children. In one cell they found Sophia's name carved into the wall, but not Sophia. She'd been moved deeper. At last, in a reinforced chamber, 7 children huddled together. Sophia, pale and thin, stared as Max appeared. Max? Did Mama send you? His warm bulk and familiar scent answered before any human could. Medical teams rushed in. Some children were near collapse from malnutrition and untreated illness. Williams's voice was taut on the radio. Helicopter evac for critical cases, now. Stone was found in his underground command room, destroying files. The cuffs closed as Williams read his charges. When he claimed the operation had been the only economic opportunity Coal Valley had left, her reply was ice. Then it needed destroying. 13 children were saved, alive, free. Some would heal completely. Others would bear scars forever. But they were going home. Sophia emerged from the tunnel, one hand gripping Max's, her sister's. You two got so big. The twins poured out 3 years of stories. Chen stood at the window, his bandaged shoulder aching. These children had saved him. He'd returned the debt. On the floor, Max refused to leave Sophia's side. Staff allowed it, knowing his presence was medicine. Coal Valley reeled. Trust in its institutions had shattered. Reverend Matthews told his congregation, "We all turned a blind eye. We failed these children. We must do better." Arrests rippled outward, Stone's network collapsing link by link. Max was nominated for the Medal of Honor for police service dogs, though his real reward was Sophia's return. Doctors warned recovery would be long. Therapists would work to mend what captivity had broken. Justice moved forward, but the truest victory was already here. Children once thought dead, now in safe beds, wrapped in the love that had never stopped fighting for them. The storm had passed. The rainbow had begun. Christmas morning in the Martinez house glowed with a magic born not from gifts, but from the miracle of a family made whole after 3 years of heartbreak. Sophia sat curled against her mother on the old couch, her frame still thin, but growing stronger under Rosa's care. The small pine tree Chen had found at the church lot's discount section shone with a light that came from answered prayers. "This is all I wanted," Rosa whispered, her voice hoarse from the cancer stealing her breath. "To have my girls together for one more Christmas." Emma and Ella flanked their mother and sister, giggling over how much they'd grown and sharing stories from the years Sophia had missed. Yet Rosa's decline was undeniable. Labored breathing, waxy skin, coughing fits she tried to hide. In private, she told Chen, "For 3 years, I feared I'd die without knowing what happened to Sophia. Now I can go in peace." With each daughter, Rosa offered parting wisdom. She urged Emma to protect without losing her own dreams, encouraged Ella to pair her practicality with openness, and freed Sophia from guilt. "What happened was not your fault," she told her. "Your curiosity is part of who you are. I won't let those monsters steal it." The twins had matured beyond their years, but kept their sweetness. "We know you're dying, Mama," Emma said gently. "But you're not leaving us. Everything important about you is already inside us." Chen promised Rosa he would be guardian, not a replacement for their parents, and Max, the family's German shepherd, rarely left her side, sensing the end. The community rallied, meals, donations, daily visits, transforming Coal Valley into the caring place it once had been. In her final weeks, Rosa taught them traditions of generations. Sophia's recovery was uneven, her therapy helping her face shadows of captivity. The twins navigated their own trauma, nightmares, and a sharper awareness of adult dangers. Chen earned their trust by blending stability with gentleness, respecting Rosa's place while preparing for his own role. Max expanded his protective watch to include Sophia, guarding against her nightmares. Legal victories brought justice, life sentences for Stone and his network, and gave the rescued children recognition that what was done to them was wrong. Rosa poured her last energy into ensuring their future, tutoring for Sophia, continued schooling for the twins, counseling, and a new home purchased by Chen. "They have each other, Chen, Max, and the strength I've given them," she told herself. Above all, she taught them hope. Never give up on the people you love. Love is stronger than evil, stronger than death. On a February morning, with frost on the windows, Rosa died, surrounded by her daughters Chen and Max. Her final whisper, "Stay together. Love each other. You are my greatest joy." Sophia gathered the twins in her arms. "She's inside us now. We'll be okay." Emma coped by organizing Rosa's room. Ella managed practical tasks. Chen shouldered the role of father with love and resolve. The church overflowed at her funeral, the community honoring the woman who had never given up. Reverend Matthews said, "She saved not just her own daughter, but 13 children. That's the kind of love that changes the world." The service was simple but powerful. Sophia sang a Spanish lullaby. The twins read a poem, and Chen vowed to honor Rosa by raising her daughters. Adoption papers, expedited by the court, made it official. Max mourned too, searching for Rosa before devoting himself fully to the girls. Slowly, they built new routines. The larger house allowed privacy without losing closeness. Sophia entered high school with support. The twins continued in elementary school with counseling. Therapy helped them process the loss and trauma. In quiet moments, they felt Rosa's presence. "Every time we take care of each other, Mama is there," Sophia told them. Coal Valley began healing from the trafficking scandal, but inside the Chen Martinez home, a new family had taken root, bound by trials that had strengthened, not broken, their bond. At night, Max settled at Sophia's bed, content that his pack was safe. Rosa's goodbye was near tragedy into something beautiful and enduring. "This is where it all began," Chen said quietly, watching Sophia's determined efforts to create something meaningful from the place where he had almost died. "If Emma and Ella hadn't found me here, if Max hadn't led them to me, none of us would be together right now." The decision to create a memorial garden at the rescue site had emerged naturally from their shared need to transform trauma into something positive, to mark the beginning of their salvation with beauty that would outlast pain. But this wasn't just about Chen's rescue. It was about honoring Rosa's memory, celebrating Sophia's return, and acknowledging the interconnected miracles that had saved their family when hope seemed impossible. Sophia's participation in the garden project had become deeply therapeutic. Her healing process accelerated by the simple act of nurturing growth from carefully tended soil. Each day brought her to the site with tools and water, her movements becoming stronger and more confident as she watched tiny green shoots emerge from the earth she had prepared with her own hands. "Mama always said that love grows things," Sophia told Chen as she positioned a climbing rose against the wooden trellis they had built together. "Even in the worst places, even when everything seems dead, love finds a way to make something beautiful grow." The rose varieties had been chosen with careful symbolism by Emma and Ella, each plant representing a different aspect of their family's journey through darkness toward light. Red roses for the love that had sustained them, white roses for the hope that had never died, pink roses for Rosa's favorite color, and yellow roses for the joy they were learning to feel again. Emma had selected the memorial roses with her characteristic attention to meaningful detail, reading about different varieties until she found ones that would bloom at different times throughout the growing season. "This way," she explained to Chen, "there will always be flowers here, no matter when people come to remember." Ella had focused on the practical aspects of the garden, choosing hardy varieties that could survive Coal Valley's harsh winters, and designing a layout that would require minimal maintenance while maximizing visual impact. Her natural eye for efficiency had created a design that was both beautiful and sustainable, reflecting the kind of wisdom that had helped their family survive their darkest years. Chen's reflection on the garden's deeper meaning came during the quiet hours when he worked alone, preparing soil and installing irrigation systems while the girls were at school. The interconnectedness of compassion had become clear to him through their shared experience, how saving one person had led to saving many, how a single act of during one of her visits to check on the family's progress. "Emma and Ella saved me by refusing to let fear stop them from doing what was right. Sophia saved herself and 13 other children by surviving long enough for us to find her. And Max saved us all by being the kind of loyal companion who never gives up on the people he loves." Max's supervision of the garden project was both touching and practical, the German shepherd positioning himself where he could watch over the work while maintaining his usual vigilant awareness of potential threats. His satisfaction with this peaceful use of his patrolled territory was evident in his relaxed posture and occasional tail wagging when the girls praised his help with their project. The aging canine had claimed a specific spot beside the largest rosebush, a sunny corner where he could rest while keeping watch over his family's memorial efforts. Local residents had begun calling it Max's Garden as much as Rosa's memorial, acknowledging the dog's central role in the rescue that had brought their community face to face with both its darkest secrets and its capacity for redemption. Community involvement in the garden project had grown organically as Coal Valley residents sought ways to process their collective guilt and demonstrate their support for the Martinez family. Local businesses donated materials, gardening clubs provided expertise, and church groups organized workdays that brought neighbors together in common purpose. This garden represents what we want our community to be, Reverend Matthews said during the informal blessing ceremony they held when the planting was complete. A place where beauty grows from ashes, where love triumphs over evil, where people take care of each other no matter what. The seasonal symbolism of planting in spring after the winter of their trials carried profound meaning for everyone involved in the project. They had survived the coldest, darkest months of their lives, and now they were literally planting seeds of hope that would bloom for years to come. Children from the local elementary school had contributed by painting small stones with messages of hope and healing, creating a border around the garden that would remind future visitors that even the smallest acts of kindness could contribute to something beautiful and lasting. As the first roses began to bloom in late May, their colors vivid against the green backdrop of new growth, Sophia stood beside her mother's memorial with tears of gratitude rather than grief. This place that had nearly witnessed Chen's death had been transformed into a testament to the power of love to create beauty from the most unlikely circumstances. "Mama would love this," Sophia whispered to a cycle of renewal that had become the family's guiding metaphor. But the love that had created this garden, the hope it represented, and the memory it honored, would endure long after the last petal had fallen to the earth. Beauty had indeed emerged from desolation, exactly as Rosa Martinez had always promised it would. The ceremony took place on a perfect June morning in Coal Valley's small town square. The kind of day when sunshine seems to bless every surface it touches, and even the most jaded observers find themselves believing in happy endings. Max sat at attention beside Chen, his German Shepherd dignity intact, despite the unusual number of people gathered to celebrate his heroism. His brown eyes focused more on his family than on the officials preparing to honor his service. FBI agent Sarah Williams stood at the makeshift podium, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd, with the authority of someone who had witnessed firsthand the retired canine's crucial role in one of the most successful child rescue operations in recent Bureau history. Behind her, a banner proclaimed, "Heroes Welcome, Honoring Canine Max," while news cameras captured every moment of the unprecedented ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen," Williams began, her professional composure softened by genuine emotion, "we gather today to recognize a hero whose courage, loyalty, and instincts saved not just one life, but many lives. Max, a retired police canine, demonstrated that true service extends far beyond official duty, that the bond between working dogs and their communities transcends career boundaries. The media attention had been building for weeks as the story of Max's role in exposing the trafficking network spread through national news outlets. Feature articles had appeared in magazines dedicated to law enforcement and animal welfare, while television networks had requested interviews with Chen and the girls about their remarkable companion. But Max himself seemed entirely unimpressed by the public acclaim. His attention focused on Sophia, Emma, and Ella as they sat in the front row, wearing their best dresses and proudest smiles. His contentment came not from recognition, but from the knowledge that his pack was safe, healthy, and thriving in ways that would have seemed impossible during the dark years of Sophia's absence. Sophia's face glowed with pride as she watched the ceremony unfold, her healing process accelerated by the positive attention focused on the dog who had been her first friend after returning home. The public acknowledged
Heroics during the rescue operation. Their 8-year-old voices carried clearly as they took turns reading their tribute to their beloved companion. Max taught us that being a hero isn't about being the biggest or the strongest, Emma read from their carefully prepared speech. It's about never giving up on the people you love, even when everyone else says it's hopeless. Chen's testimony during the ceremony provided the official account of how Max's instincts and training had saved his life and ultimately led to justice for 13 missing children. But his words carried emotional weight that transcended the bare facts, acknowledging the German Shepherd's role not just as a working dog, but as a family member whose loyalty had preserved their bonds through unimaginable trials. Max didn't just save my life on those railroad tracks, Chen told the assembled crowd, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. He saved our entire family by refusing to accept that Sophia was gone forever. His faithfulness kept hope alive when everything else suggested we should give up. The law enforcement tribute was particularly moving, as current canine units from across the region gathered to honor their retired colleague. Working dogs and their handlers stood at attention as Max was presented with the Medal of Honor for Police Service Dogs, their professional respect evident in the military precision of their formation. The symbolic importance of Max's recognition extended far beyond individual achievement, representing the power of loyalty, training, and love to overcome even the most sophisticated evil. His story had become a parable of sorts, proof that courage could emerge from unexpected sources and that retirement from official duty didn't mean retirement from service to others. Local officials had proclaimed June 15th as Canine Max Day in Coal Valley, ensuring that his heroism would be remembered annually, and that future generations would understand the role one remarkable dog had played in their community's redemption. School children would learn about Max's courage alongside other local history, understanding that heroes could have 4 legs and wet noses just as easily as badges and uniforms. The discussion of Max's future service took on special significance, as law enforcement agencies requested his participation in training programs for both working dogs and their handlers. His unique experience with long-term scent tracking and victim location could provide valuable insights that might save other children in similar situations. Max has demonstrated capabilities that we're still trying to understand, explained the FBI canine specialist who had worked with him during the rescue operation. His ability to distinguish between old and fresh scent trails, his recognition of specific individuals after years of separation, and his intuitive understanding of human trauma responses. Officials discussed Max's potential contributions to law enforcement training. Everyone understood that his primary loyalty would always belong to the Martinez family. Any future service would be balanced against his role as protector and companion to 3 girls who depended on him for far more than professional expertise. The ceremony concluded with Max receiving his medal with the same calm dignity he had shown throughout his career, accepting the honor gracefully, while maintaining his focus on the people who mattered most to him. As the crowd dispersed and the media packed their equipment, Max walked home with his family, the weight of official recognition far less important to him than the satisfaction of another successful patrol. The bronze medal would take its place on the mantle beside Rosa's photograph and Sophia's school pictures, but Max's real reward was the laughter of children who were safe, the peaceful nights when no threats materialized, and the knowledge that his service had helped transform tragedy into triumph. He was, in every sense that mattered, exactly what the ceremony had proclaimed him to be, a hero whose story would inspire others long after his own service days were nothing more than cherished memory. The new house on Maple Street represented more than just a change of address for the Chen Martinez family. It was a physical manifestation of their transformation from survivors to thrivers, from a broken family barely holding together to a chosen family strong enough to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The 2-story colonial, with its wraparound porch and large backyard, provided space for everyone to grow while maintaining the close bonds that had sustained them through their darkest hours. Sophia's progress in the months since the rescue had been remarkable in its steady consistency, her healing journey supported by professional counseling and the unwavering love of her new family. The nightmares still came occasionally, and crowded spaces could trigger anxiety that required careful management, but her fundamental spirit remained unbroken. More importantly, she had found purpose in her survival, volunteering with organizations that supported other trafficking victims and serving as living proof that recovery was possible. "I want to become a social worker," Sophia announced during one of their family dinners, her voice carrying the quiet determination that had helped her survive 3 years of captivity. "I want to help other kids who've been through what I experienced, show them that they can have normal lives again." Her educational progress had exceeded everyone's expectations, as tutors helped her catch up on the schooling interrupted by her disappearance. The trauma had actually sharpened certain aspects of her intelligence, giving her insights into human psychology and social dynamics that her teachers found remarkable for someone her age. Emma and Elle smoothed by the counseling support Chen had arranged, helping them process their own trauma while developing the social skills they had missed during their years of premature responsibility. Their grades had improved dramatically once they no longer carried the weight of adult concerns, and their natural intelligence was finally free to flourish in age-appropriate pursuits. Emma had discovered a talent for creative writing, her English teacher encouraging her to enter state competitions with essays that drew from her family's experiences without exploiting their pain. Her protective instincts had evolved into advocacy skills that served her well in student government and peer mediation programs. Ella's practical nature had found expression in mathematics and engineering concepts, her mind naturally gravitating toward problem-solving approaches that reminded Chen of the resourcefulness that had helped their family survive their most difficult years.
She talked about becoming an engineer, designing systems that could help people in ways that technology couldn't currently address. Chen's growth from single police officer to father of three had challenged him in ways that no amount of law enforcement training could have prepared him for. The rewards, however, far exceeded the difficulties, as he discovered that parenthood amplified rather than diminished his capacity for love and service. "I thought I knew what it meant to protect and serve," Chen confided to Agent Williams during one of their periodic check-ins. "But raising these girls has taught me that the most important service happens at the dinner table, helping with homework and listening to their dreams about the future." His professional life had evolved as well. His experience with the trafficking case leading to a promotion to Federal Task Force Coordinator, a position that allowed him to work from a regional office while maintaining flexibility for family responsibilities. The work felt more meaningful now, informed by personal understanding of how crimes against children affect entire families for generations. Community transformation in Coal Valley had proceeded with the gradual pace that characterizes real change. But the improvements were unmistakable to anyone who had known the town before the trafficking ring's exposure. Federal investment in economic development had brought new businesses and opportunities, while the revelations about corruption had inspired civic engagement that was slowly rebuilding trust in local institutions. The town square where Max had received his medal had been renovated, with grants secured by residents who were determined to create positive change from their community's brush with national attention. New playgrounds, walking trails, and community gardens reflected a commitment to creating the kind of environment where families could thrive and children could grow up safely. Max's contentment in his peaceful retirement was evident to anyone who observed. His daily routines, the aging canine's satisfaction radiating from his very posture as he supervised his family's activities. At 9 years old, he moved more slowly than in his prime, but his devotion remained absolute, his protective instincts as sharp as ever despite his preference for afternoon naps in sunny patches of their new backyard. The German Shepherd had earned the kind of retirement that every working dog deserved, surrounded by people who loved him, respected for his service, and comfortable in the knowledge that his mission had been accomplished with distinction. His legacy would live on not just in the children he had helped save, but in the training programs that were incorporating his techniques, and the other dogs who would benefit from his accumulated wisdom. Legacy awareness had become a central theme in the girls' understanding of their mother's sacrifice and their responsibility to honor her memory through the choices they made and the lives they built. Rosa's courage in refusing to accept official indifference to Sophia's disappearance had created the circumstances that ultimately saved 13 children and exposed a criminal network that had operated with impunity for years. "Mama didn't just save me," Sophia explained to younger trafficking survivors during one of her volunteer sessions. "She saved all of us by refusing to give up, by keeping our stories alive when everyone else wanted to forget them. That's what love does. It fights for people even when the odds seem impossible." The understanding that their survival carried obligations as well as opportunities had shaped how all three girls approached their education and future planning. They weren't just building lives for themselves, but lives that would honor the sacrifices made on their behalf and contribute to preventing other families from experiencing similar tragedies. As autumn painted Coal Valley in shades of gold and crimson, the Chen Martinez family could often be seen walking together toward the town square. 4 figures and a dog, moving with the easy confidence of people who had found their place in the world. Chen's height provided protection for the girls clustered around him, while Max ranged slightly ahead, his patrol instincts still operational despite his retirement status. Their destination was usually Rosa's memorial garden, where they would spend quiet time tending the roses that had grown lush and beautiful through their first full growing season. The garden had become a pilgrimage site of sorts for other families of missing children, a place where hope could be nourished and love could be remembered. But the real horizon they walked toward wasn't geographical. It was the future they were building together, one day at a time, one challenge at a time, one small victory at a time. They had learned that healing wasn't a destination but a journey, that family wasn't just about blood relationships, but about the people who chose to stand together
through whatever storms might come. The story of the Martinez family and their remarkable dog would be told for generations in Coal Valley, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, love could triumph over evil, hope could survive against impossible odds. And sometimes, God really did send angels with paws to protect his most vulnerable children. Their journey toward new horizons would continue long after this chapter ended, but they would travel that road together, bound by trials that had only made them stronger, and guided by the memory of a mother whose love had refused to die even when hope seemed impossible. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and anchored in love that had already proven itself capable of moving mountains, changing hearts, and bringing lost children home. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about grand gestures or miraculous rescues. They're about the quiet loyalty that shows up every single day. Max's devotion to the Martinez family reminds us why German Shepherds have earned such a special place in our hearts. These remarkable dogs don't just protect our homes, they guard our souls, read our emotions, and love us with a purity that can heal even the deepest wounds. The bond between humans and dogs transcends words, doesn't it? It's written in the way they sense our sadness before we even realize we're hurting, in their unwavering presence during our darkest hours, and in the joy they bring to our simplest moments. If you've been blessed with a German Shepherd, or any dog really, you know there's always more to discover about deepening that connection. I've found that understanding their unique ways of communicating and showing love can transform an already beautiful relationship into something truly extraordinary. Your faithful companion deserves nothing less than your very best understanding and care.